Attack on Titan and Vinland Saga are stories that share fairly similar themes. They both involve main characters who dream of becoming an adventurer of sorts. For Eren, it was to join the Survey Corps. For Thorfinn, it was to become a raider. And both achieved that dream, although through undesirable circumstances and goals. Eren joined the Survey Corps to pursue the extermination of Titans in revenge for his parents' death, while Thorfinn became a raider to avenge his father's death. Even the messaging they cover are similar, which are anti-revenge and anti-war. But that's where the similarities end, because once you look deeper into the stories, Vinland Saga does not do well at its messaging. As a note, I will only compare what's shown in the anime, as I don't read the manga. First is the idea of warrior and guilt. The warrior can be described as one who obtains status through warfare, with the message also being that they will come to regret the status gained through that method. In Vinland Saga, the display of warriorhood is quite prolific, as seen through characters such as Thors, Garda, Thorfinn, Olmar, Thorkel, Thorgil, and many other background characters. But the problem is that not every character expresses guilt or regret at being a warrior. While Thors, Garda, Thorfinn, and Olmar are characters that express guilt at being a warrior, Thorkel and Thorgil are characters that don't. So rather than the message of the path of a warrior leads to regret, it's more of being a warrior may not suit everyone. And even when it comes to showing that regret or guilt, it's not very convincing. In Thor's case, he left the Jomsviking because he found a new purpose in life, after Helga was born. His desire to live a more peaceful life is justified and reasonable, but his total aversion to fighting isn't. Similarly with Garda, it isn't that he feels guilty for fighting and killing, but that he didn't get to spend time with his wife and son. If he had been successful in the attack, and was able to spend time with his wife and son afterwards, then there would be no regret. And the least convincing of all is Thorfinn. You might say that he feels the weight of his actions after he was no longer blinded by revenge, but I still have to say that the level of trauma displayed is not convincing. There's just not enough character development to show it. Now let's compare this to Attack on Titan. The warriors in Attack on Titan are those in the warrior unit. The purpose of the warrior unit is to let the most exceptional candidates inherit the Titan powers. While for the candidates, the motivation to join the unit is to let the families become honorary Malian citizens. With this status elevation in mind, children are often forced by their parents to join. An Attack on Titan handles the warrior's guilt much better, since every single family involved eventually shows the remorse at prioritizing the status gained than the time spent with their family member. As for the warriors themselves, they experience a humanizing process of their enemies, which makes the eventual elevation of guilt understandable. Rainer, Bertolt, and Annie all developed relationships with the people of Paradis Island after having lived and fought with them, while someone like Gabby had to contend with a family member of someone she killed, which forced her to eventually humanize the people of Paradis Island rather than just view them as devils. Next is the idea of forgiveness and discrimination. The message from both stories is that discrimination and the lack of forgiveness both lead to horrible acts. In Vinland Saga, the idea of forgiveness and discrimination is integrally linked. Vikings don't raid and capture slaves out of revenge, just simply out of a superficial form of discrimination. And the idea of discrimination is explored through Canute, when the priest explains to him what love is. And there are two concepts of love: true love, which is analogous to God's love, and human love, which is actually discrimination. And when Canute realizes this, he is unable to forgive God for the impossible trial that he has set upon man, which then begins his path of kinghood, one filled with bloodshed and conquest. And as insightful and powerful as this message is, it serves to undermine some of the messaging and events in the story. Thors is shown as someone who chooses principle over family, such as when he buys a runaway slave, because it wasn't an act of kindness, but an act of discrimination against his family, since the decision was made only by himself. Similarly, when he chose to not kill Askeladd's soldiers during the ambush, he was choosing principle over Thorfinn, although it could be argued that the difference of killing or not killing would not have mattered in that situation. Forgiveness is also shown to be something to be punished for, such as when the old woman takes in Thorfinn and shields him from the soldier. It again doesn't show it as a moral act, but simply discrimination against her village. And when Thorfinn says he wants to create a country without war nor slaves, he essentially sets up a qualifier for those who can join and stay in it. Those who can join are those who can escape in the first place, because he won't fight to free them. and those who can stay in it are those who can keep up when they need to run away, because they won't fight to protect them. Now let's change our perspective to Attack on Titan. In Attack on Titan, the two ideas are more cause and effect. The lack of forgiveness is what creates discrimination, and it shows the consequence of this through the rumbling. The outside world did not forgive the Eldians for what they did in the past, which led to the discrimination of the present generations. This discrimination then makes Zeke's parents want to revive the Eldian Empire, which leads to Zeke joining the warrior unit and eventually inheriting the Beast Titan. At some point, Eren and the others snuck outside the island to find a way to make peace with the outside world, but what they found was that the world would not forgive the people of Paradis Island, which leads to Eren planning the rumbling. And finally, with Zeke unable to forgive his parents, it leads to his desire to sterilize all Eldians, which created the opportunity for Eren to activate the rumbling. Lastly is peace and freedom. Peace and freedom can be regarded as two sides of the same coin, peace referring to the mental state, and freedom referring to the physical state. Yet there is also the polarity between them. Peace is something you can choose, whereas freedom is a stroke of luck. In Vinland Saga, the idea of peace is conveyed through the famous phrase, "You have no enemies." But there are actually two versions of this phrase. The first version is when Thor tells his child Thorfinn. What makes this phrase significant is because of the environment. Thorfinn grew up in the Viking culture, and you can see this through the boy's hobby of play fighting, and the villagers celebrating at the prospect of going on a raid. What this demonstrates is that the people of the village are not at peace, as they perceive that they are inadequate, that they are lacking something, and that something can only be gained through warfare and pillaging. So when Thor says you have no enemies, it means to tell Thorfinn that he isn't missing anything in his life, nor that he would actually gain anything from killing someone else. Then there's the second version of this quote, which is used by Thorfinn during the enslavement arc. But "you have no enemies" is only meaningful when applied to the idea of creating enemies. So what happens if someone else means to harm you or someone else? And we can now see how this question exposes the idea of freedom. Thorfinn can choose not to hit back. He can choose not to use a weapon, because he has afforded the luxury of his experience and being born as a man. But we can see what happens when you lack either aspect, through Einar and Arnheid. Can you imagine how aggravating it would be to Einar if Thor and Thorfinn whispered to him that he had no enemies as he watches his mother and sister die? Can you imagine how ridiculous it would look if Thor and Thorfinn whispered to Arnheid that she has no enemies while being beaten? But it is also that when Thorfinn says he has no enemies, this isn't actually true. He has enemies, just not in the form of humans. His enemies are the trees, the grass, and even the fish. He gains something from killing them, from displacing them, much in the same way raiders do from pillaging. He is simply expressing human love, discrimination. When it comes to peace in Attack on Titan's case, I have pretty much covered it already when explaining the cycle of hate and the desire for higher status. But the idea of freedom is probably best seen through the motive of walls. In Marley, the walls of the camps are meant to keep Eldians in, but they also serve to keep Marlians out, which makes neither side truly free. Although Eldians aren't free because of oppression, Marlians aren't free through choice. In contrast, the walls of Paradis Island do both. While the walls were initially made to keep people in, it eventually became a choice to stay within the walls because of the threat of the Titans outside of them. Hence this is why the scene of Eren being in the midst of an unending sky is so contrasting. There is not a single wall to block him, either to keep him in or out. It embodies the idea of true freedom. To end this video, there is one character in Vinland Saga that I regard as the best, but will probably never see again. And that is Olmar. Olmar represents the average person, the one who dreams big, the one who wants to become famous through their art, or rich by starting a business. But they will soon find out how difficult the work actually is, and how much luck is actually involved. They will struggle, and one day realize that they aren't the chosen one, that greatness eludes them, and that averageness is the only thing that they have. You are probably Olmar. I'm probably Olmar. But the lesson to learn from Olmar isn't about settling. The lesson is to not worry about tomorrow's glory or wealth that may never come, and to simply focus on today's contentment and the ability to recognize where your place may be in life. To put in effort where it matters, regardless of outcome. Because a farmer's harvest could always be ruined by natural disasters or disease. Does that mean they should have never planted in the first place? Because if the farmer does not plant, then he cannot reap. So this isn't a message of discouragement, but rather reasonable encouragement. Life is a series of coincidences, and sometimes your coincidences just haven't lined up yet. And the one thing you should realize is that a farmer cannot truly grow things. They may only prepare the land, plant the seeds, and tend to its needs, because it is the plants themselves who do the growing. All the farmer can then do is simply wait for the day of harvest and see if they succeeded or not, and then to do it all over again. Just like making a video.